Minutes ago? Thought I'd get you back. Don't smile, Julie. You're next. Okay, sisters and brothers, this is our third session, the 1 o'clock session, and it's titled Basic Income or Raised Rates. And our speakers today, our first speaker, it'll go in this order. Our first speaker today is Comrade Brother John Clarke, who became active in anti-poverty struggles when he helped to form the Union of Unemployed Workers in London, Ontario in 1983. The LUUW was one of the groups that helped to establish the Ontario Coalition Against Poverty. In 1990, John moved to Toronto to become an OCAP organizer and has continued in that capacity, helping to mobilize poor communities resisting neoliberal austerity ever since. In the latest edition of Turn Left magazine is an excellent article by John titled Basic Income as Neoliberal Stalking Horse. So John also, of course, as we all know here, is the man at the forefront of the anti-poverty struggle. And our second speaker is Sister Jessica Sikora. She was recently elected to the OPSEU Executive Board just a couple of weeks or so ago. Proud of that, along with her brother, Julius, sitting right here.
What is OPSEU? Just for those.
Oh, sorry, the Ontario Public Service Employees Union. Sorry about that. Okay, and she's also president of the same union, Local 586, whose members work at ODSP, Ministry of Community and Social Services in Toronto. Region 5. Jessica, who was on OPSEU's Provincial Young Workers Committee, famously protested Justin Trudeau's lies at a CLC Young Workers Conference in Ottawa in 2016. Remember that. Jessica is also active in the Raise and Rates campaign and the Fight for $15 and Fairness campaign. So without further ado, each speaker has up to 30 minutes, and we'll start with John and then go to Jessica. Yes, oh, the mic. Where's the...
You want to stand on it? Yeah, let me get on this.
It's lighter and everything for you, John. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you very much. In the last while, OCAP has taken a position of being taking in a negative position on the question of basic income, both from the standpoint of assessing the neoliberal attack that's coming down, that's going to utilise something that will be called basic income, but also from the standpoint of being very critical of it as a potential left strategy. And I'm going to try to elaborate. And at a conference devoted to ideas of socialism, I think we can assume a certain understanding of the exploitative nature of capitalism, and I think we can also agree that the state is not a neutral body presiding with Solomonic wisdom over the contending parties, but very enthusiastically intervenes on the other side. So to assess the basic income, I'll begin with what I believe is the attack that's being prepared. At the end of the post-war boom, you saw a situation where that period of relative concession came to an end. Rates of profit were in decline, and there was a recognition that there was a need to intensify the exploitation of the working class globally. There were a whole series of strategies that were put in place to remove barriers to the mobility and exploitive capacities of capital. But one of the things they placed a great deal of emphasis on was the use of what Marx referred to as the industrial reserve army, the unemployed, the surplus population that's created by this system. And they realized that ramping up unemployment was very, very important to their agenda. Central banks even developed a theory of a natural rate of unemployment to try to ensure that unemployment levels came up. At the same time, they recognised that to be unemployed in a situation where there were relatively adequate programs of income support was an entirely different question to being in a situation where people had nothing to turn to. And so they put a great deal of emphasis on hacking away at unemployment insurance, at social assistance, and indeed even compelling injured workers and disabled people to participate in the scramble for the lowest paying jobs on offer. And that essentially was that was an agenda that was implemented with enormous enthusiasm and enormous success. What it led to was a proliferation of low-wage, precarious work on a scale that was quite mind-boggling. And you could pick any jurisdiction pretty well, but let's pick Ontario. 20 years ago, one worker in 40 was working for the minimum wage. By 2015, that had gone to one worker in 8. So the scale of the super exploitation of the poorest workers was mind-boggling, and it was entirely facilitated by hacking away at unemployment insurance and reducing the adequacy and increasing the uncertainties of social assistance. We all know about the Mike Harris cuts and that occurred in Ontario and all the rest of it. Now, I believe today what they're looking at is a refinement of that inducive tool. They're looking at increasing the scramble for the lowest paying jobs on offer. And the idea of what was classically referred to as a guaranteed annual income is something that the right and the architects of neoliberalism have always shown a great deal of interest in, going back to Uncle Milton Friedman himself. A great deal of interest in doing it. Today, the idea has been carried forward by the right-wing neoliberal thinker in the United States, Charles Murray. He has shown great interest in the idea of a basic income of a particular kind. What he argues is that you need to introduce a universal payment that is set at a very, very low level so that it doesn't interfere with the inducement to take low-paid work. But the big point for him is that it doesn't augment existing systems of social provision, it replaces them. So that with this low payment, you become a customer in the neoliberal job market, shopping for the things that used to be social and public services. That's essentially the vision that they're putting forward. Really today, there is an enormous amount of interest being shown in this kind of a model of income support. In part, what it really comes down to is providing a means-tested wage top-up to the lowest paying workers. That is really a wage top-up to the lowest paying employers. And that it will be paid for by privatising and cutting back on other systems of social provision. That's the notion that they have in mind. Obviously, if you create a situation where low-wage workers no longer get their wages entirely from their employers, but receive a portion of their wages, in effect, out of the general tax revenues, the advantages for low-paying employers are glaringly obvious. You have a situation where they are under no pressure whatsoever to increase wages, and where governments are off the hook in terms of increasing minimum wages. That's the real beauty of the system. And moreover, because it is a kind of a commodification, it lends itself so admirably to the cutback and privatisation agenda. And that's really what we're looking at, and the interest in it is very, very widespread. The International Monetary Fund economists are talking about it. Recently at Davos, they even held a workshop on basic income up there on the luxury resort in the Swiss Alps. In the Netherlands, a pilot project is being readied. In Finland, one is underway, where they're paying people $600 a month, and they're giving it to unemployed people, and this is being provided by a government that recently privatised the employment services of the country. That is introducing introducing privatisation measures within the healthcare system, and which is attacking the trade unions in Finland to a huge degree. So I think the writing's on the wall, and I'm going to leave the detailed look at the Ontario situation to Jessica, but just to say that I think that the model that is being tested here is entirely in line with that idea. They're going to provide people with a payment that constitutes 75% of the low income measure. 70% of the people who are going to get it are going to be waged, and it's going to be clearly introduced in a context where the Ontario government is leading the pack across the country in terms of an agenda of privatisation and austerity. They will, of course, and they point to this, they will make the system less intrusive, in the sense that some of the old bureaucratic intrusion and moral policing that has been built into welfare systems is going to be eased up on. But I think they're largely doing this because they're in a position to do that anyway. They have been so successful in creating a low-wage, precarious workforce that they don't need some of the old systems of heavy-handed moral policing that used to be built into welfare systems. They've succeeded in creating a low-wage workforce. They don't need to be prodding people in the same ways. They need a system that is less conditional, and so they're ready, I think, to move in that direction. They're ready to give that concession. They're ready to give that concession up. The writing, I would really say very, very clearly, is on the wall in terms of the kind of model that they're going to try to introduce. Something that would be totally in line with the neoliberal goals of privatisation, of austerity, and increasing the rate of exploitation of working class people. But there is at the same time emerging, and there's emerged very strongly, a movement amongst which we could broadly call a progressive notion of basic income, that's counterposed to the neoliberal model. It's very broad. It ranges from mildly liberal, very responsible, somewhat reduced poverty kind of models to ideas that are entirely transformative. The co-founder of the Basic Income Earth Network, a Belgian professor by the name of Philip van Parijs, has actually described basic income as the capitalist road to communism. He actually argues that it's possible to introduce a measure of social reform within capitalism that will undermine the capitalist job market so completely that you open up the road to a socialised society. Which, I'm sorry, with all due respect to the good professor, I think is delusional. I just don't think that's a realistic way of viewing things. And so the argument is made is that what is going to be introduced is a universal, an adequate payment, a universal payment that goes to everybody, that is adequate enough that people could live on it, and it's going to be provided by the state, and at the same time other things will not be cut back. That's essentially the vision. The problem, I think, with it is that really in every example that I've ever seen of people putting forward this idea, the benefits of such a system are sold without there being any realistic assessment of the actual practical possibilities of what are the balance of forces in society, how fundamental a demand are you putting before the capitalist state. None of those things are ever really considered. It's just advanced as a kind of a faith-based reasoning that this can be obtained. And so when you argue against it, there's this contemptuous notion that you're messing around with tinkering with existing systems of income support, whereas they have this bold vision of changing society through a basic income. But I feel sort of like normally when people think rationally, what they do is they don't just think about benefits, they think about the actual possibilities. I mean, I'm now into my 60s and I could well be convinced that being young again would be a wonderful thing. But I wouldn't give too much thought to a project to try and become young again, because I don't believe it's possible. And I don't believe it's possible to get the capitalist state to provide the kind of adequate universal payment that is being suggested. I mean, I think you have to think about the enormity of this as a reform measure that's being put on the table. It is being suggested that you are going to get the capitalist state to roll back 40 years of neoliberalism, and not just do that, but in fact undermine the basis for the capitalist job market itself.
Right.
Undermine the whole coercive factor that plays into that's the whole idea that's put forward by visionaries of a progressive basic income, is everyone gets this payment as a matter of right. They can work or not work as they see fit. That what in fact is being argued is that the capitalist state is going to provide the working class with an indefinite unlimited strike fund. And the reality is that's, I'm afraid, not likely to happen. But moreover, it's argued that this is going to happen at a time when our unions and our social movements and our political movements are weaker than they've been in the past. But not only that, the capitalist class, the 1%, is going to do it. They're going to cooperate because they're going to see it as a fair and rational thing that needs to happen. And Elon Musk is going to provide us with the bounty of a basic income with his robots. I mean, I'm sorry to sound, I am a little sarcastic, but I feel that it really is a very, very serious miscalculation on the part of those on the left who are putting forward this idea. And I think it really does reflect a kind of a demoralised disorientation. We have gone through a very difficult period. There have been defeats, very real defeats. And there's this sort of notion that there is some kind of social policy end run around the problem that can make it all go away. And I just don't think, I don't think that exists. So unfortunately, however, I must say that probably the predominant thinking at the moment, in broadly defined the left, is at least a receptiveness to the idea. And there are strong currents that are actually advancing the idea. The former Greek finance minister, Varoufakis, argues for a basic income. And the line that he puts forward is that it will civilise capitalism. Just as he thought he could get a deal with the Troika, now he thinks that he can civilise capitalism. I think that's again a huge miscalculation. But through the British former journalist, now official of the Labour Party, Paul Mason, the idea has also gone into the British Labour Party. And John McDonnell, the Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, is pushing very, very hard for the Labour Party to adopt a basic income approach. His argument is that elected in 2020 or before, a Labour government would introduce measures of social reform that would surpass that of Clement Attlee in 1945, and that basic income would be central to it. I'm perhaps less hopeful of him that a golden age of Keynesianism is in the wings, but nonetheless, while I fully support the developments within the British Labour Party, and while I fully support Jeremy Corbyn's challenge to Blairism, I'm certainly not arguing for any sectarian position. I think it really is an expression of political limitations to think that there is going to be the possibility of creating this kind of reform at the present time. And you are creating a model that, even if the British Labour Party originally moved to provide a fairly adequate payment, you're creating a model that in later hands could be returned to the neoliberal fold with very, very, very great ease. So I think that what we need to do in the present time is to understand a couple of things. First of all, the idea is not just simply to have a vision. The idea is to build the movements necessary to actually struggle for the things that we need. because it does come down to the balance of forces in society. We don't have, I don't care what Elon Musk and the CEO of Deutsche Telekom and all the rest of them say about how much they support basic income. Their neoliberal agenda will continue and will be arrested and limited only to the extent that the working class has the capacity to struggle and defeat them. That's the reality of that. And really, at the present time, I think that rather than buy into a commodified system of social provision that lends itself so readily, if we want to put forward bold and challenging demands, I think we should focus on really pushing for things that can be won in the present period, to really organise around free and accessible public services, expanded public services, to put our resources into fighting for housing, to put our efforts into fighting for systems of social provision that we can actually win gains on and win improvements on. I arrived here breathless because the TTC was down again. A demand for free and accessible public transport that runs, including on the weekends, will be a struggle well worth taking. Well worth taking. And so I will hand things over to Jessica to talk more about the Ontario specifics, because they're extremely instructive and I think fall entirely in line with what I was just talking about. But I believe that what we have, unfortunately, is a situation where neoliberalism is reconfiguring its income support strategy. And something that they will describe as basic income is very, very central to that. Unfortunately, due to a demoralised and a disorientated perspective, sections of the left are actually laying down a welcome mat. I think that's a really unfortunate mistake that has been made. I think it needs to be challenged, and I think we need to think through the demands that we can really unite working class people around in the period ahead. Thanks very much.
Thanks, John. And Jessica?
Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody, for having me here, and it's pretty fantastic to see this kind of turnout to talk about these incredibly important issues, especially on one of the first beautiful Saturdays we've had in a while. So thank you for taking the time to be here today. I'm going to be speaking today from the perspective of somebody who's working within our current social assistance system. From that perspective, not officially on behalf of the Ministry of Community and Social Services. As you might imagine, my employer does not sanction my participation in a conversation like this, which makes it all that more necessary that this kind of voice is included. And I do want to take a moment to say that it's too bad that we don't also have the perspective of somebody who, and that was the plan today, unfortunately she couldn't join us, but a sister who herself is living under the social assistance system in Ontario, because one of the things that absolutely has successfully happened is continuing and strengthening conversation about the worthy poor and the unworthy poor, and the real poverty policing that is built into our system that John alluded to and that I'm going to talk about a little bit as well, because I really do think that was a conscious effort, not only to undermine support for things like social assistance, but also to undermine the relationship between people who do rely on social assistance and that system itself. And I think that's all part of a bigger question here. So I'm going to start a little bit by talking about, so did anybody sort of see any of the fanfare that came with the rollout of basic income in Ontario? So, articles and, yeah, right? The government is making a big deal of this. The government is making a big deal right now out of anything that they think is going to buy them any positive press whatsoever. And that's going to happen when your numbers, your support numbers are, I think, the last I heard was
single digits.
Officially, yeah, in the single digits, and officially some of the lowest numbers that a sitting premier has ever had in terms of support. So needless to say, they're desperate, right? And they're desperate to show that suddenly they're going to have an 11th hour wake-up call, and they're going to be the she's suddenly going to be the social justice premier that she promised us, and that, again, unfortunately, a whole lot of people, including really well-meaning people on the left, really wanted to buy that line. So the basic income that's been proposed, it's really important right off the bat to make sure that we eliminate any discussion that pretends that there's anything universal about this universal basic income. So this pilot that's being proposed is 4,000 participants. I want to say that if those 4,000 participants were all social assistance recipients, we would still be looking at 99.96% of people that are currently relying on social assistance in the province of Ontario seeing no meaningful change to the system that they are currently living under. And this pilot is supposed to take place for up to 3 years. So if you right now are living on something like Ontario Disability Support or something like Ontario Works, and you see the fanfare that comes out around something like basic income, as you can imagine, your gut response is going to be, this is fantastic. How do I get to be a part of this? And this is something that absolutely we're seeing as frontline workers. We've got clients coming in the door and saying, yeah, but I hear there's this other thing available, right? So the marketing strategy around the basic income is going well for the Liberals. And I would say it's one of the jobs of the people in this room and the people on the principled left who are understanding some of the arguments, for example, that John has put forward against basic income, that we really need to challenge that. And we really need to say, are we talking about a real move towards something that's going to help people, or are we talking about taking an extremely small portion of the population and giving them this tiny glimmer of hope that, like John said, I think we need to look at as a unicorn. It's beautiful, it's lovely, it's an appealing concept, but it's not real, and it's never going to be real because of the reality of where the funding is going to come from for a program like that. We're supposed to believe that the same corporations who have driven down wages, promoted precarious work, promoted a situation where you need to rely on, you can't rely on the difference between 40 hours of work this week and 6 hours of work next week, is suddenly going to come to the plate and say, oh, we're sorry, we recognize that we've created this untenable situation, and now we're going to funnel absolute billions of dollars into a true supportive system, and at the same time do away with the poverty policing that currently goes along with social assistance. So you're talking about an incredibly small part of the population who is going to be receiving, and this is an important number for people, so for the year it's $16,989. Those who are currently on social assistance who decide to sign up for this program actually do have to completely remove themselves from all other supports that are currently provided by the social assistance system, and that's something that a lot of people are not paying attention to. One of the things, the most important, or I think certainly the largest in terms of dollar value, is those who rely on mobility devices. So I don't know if anybody has ever gone through or supported somebody going through the process of applying for a power scooter or a wheelchair or a thing along those lines. Those devices cost about what a really low-range vehicle, what a really low-range car costs. And there are, separate programs within the government of Ontario that are supposed to help you with that. But if you're on something like social assistance and you apply and you are in need of something like a scooter or a power wheelchair, right now the government of Ontario, through the social assistance program, that's one of the roles that a worker is going to do, right? Is that they're going to help connect you with funding. That's the sort of thing that you give up if you decide to go over to the basic income. And that's only one example. The idea that they're counting on is that the average person who's relying on something like social assistance, or the average person who is working and not making ends meet, is not going to recognize the potential for these costs, because it's like It's like it is for anybody who's living on, you know, on a moment-to-moment basis. You're not thinking about the emergency situations that you may require support for. And so if you say, oh, well, you know, that's fine, I don't need a mobility device, and I don't, and there's the upfront costs, and then there's the incredible ongoing costs, which again tends to be something that people on social assistance are applying to workers to get support for, and the sort of thing that you're saying goodbye to. I want to talk a little bit about the privatization cycle, because it's really easy, I think, for people to say, well, the government is doing this basic income pilot because they really do want to, they want to improve things, right? Well, we need to ask a question, which is, where was this same government when they had the ability to improve the existing social assistance program? Why would a government allow something like social assistance to rot, and I really use that word very intentionally, rot, over, you know, decades, and then suddenly come to the table and say, oh, you know, we recognize that our current poverty strategy isn't working and suddenly we want to do something about it. I think we should be incredibly skeptical of where that would come from. And so I would like to link this back to the privatization cycle. So this is something that we know. We know that the Liberal government, not just in Ontario, but our federal Liberal government as well, they are obsessed with privatization, right? And they'll give it any name they want to give it, you know, asset reallocation. I can, you know, go on with name after name that they've given it. But they sincerely believe that the government should not be in, I suppose, the asset owning business, but they also don't think they should be in the employment business, and we'll talk about that as well. And so they are pursuing privatization at every realm that they can possibly pursue it at. And this is absolutely a process where what they do is say, we've got a service. We don't really want to be in the business of delivering this service. So what is the very first thing that we're going to do? We're going to intentionally underfund it, and we are going to intentionally make it hard to access. We're going to intentionally make it so that people who rely on this public service become incredibly angered by that service, right? And then what do you think the next thing that's going to happen is? There's going to be a call for change. There's going to be a cry for change, and there's a desperate cry for change when we talk about something like social assistance, and there should be, because the program has been designed to rot. It's been designed so that there is an incredibly acrimonious relationship between people who rely on the system and the people who implement and the people who make policy around the decision, but mostly with frontline workers, people who do the kind of thing that I do. So there's this incredible cry for, we need something new. And is that not the perfect opportunity for a privatization-obsessed government to say, do you know what the solution is? As always, business can do it better, right?
Yeah.
So then we start to talk about, how do they actually go about doing that? How do you privatize something like, and we've seen examples of privatization of employment services. John talked about it a little bit in terms of some of our international neighbors that have had these same questions come to mind. The government of Ontario has decided to do this in a way where they look at the current system and they say, well, what are the barriers to privatization? What are the things that don't make this appealing? And I would say, and it's really interesting that John brought this up, I would say the reason why they're willing to make this concession now on poverty policing is not that they've come to their senses and said, policing the worthy and the unworthy poor is an absolutely atrocious thing to do. I think it's because they have recognized that poverty policing is incredibly worker intensive, right? It's something that requires you to have people doing the work of policing. Mm-hmm. And if you're going to have, and this is something that a lot of people don't know, in the government of Ontario, caseworkers, so ODSP caseworking staff, is actually the third highest number of people employed in any single position in the government, right? Wow. So it's corrections officers, and then people that fall in a really, really wide category of sort of administrative support, and then ODSP caseworkers. So that is an intensive number of bodies that the reason why those intensive number of bodies are in these acrimonious relationships with clients in terms of being able to serve clients is because we've been told that our job, and you know, they don't say this to us in direct terms, they don't say it's your job to police those who are on the streets, but it's done through the policies that we're expected to uphold, right? And it's done through things like having to monitor on a month-to-month basis any additional income whatsoever that somebody has coming in, but for example, prioritizing certain types of income over others. So one of the ones that always sticks out to me that a lot of people don't know is that if you are living on social assistance in the province of Ontario, if you're living on ODSP, and you are privileged enough to have family who can help support you, and I'm not knocking that, but we have to acknowledge that some people have that privilege and some people don't, you're entitled to receive up to $500 a month to assist you with your costs of living if it's through, you know, what they call windfall or through family giving or something along those lines. Whereas if you're working and you're on social assistance, it's actually only the first $200 that you make that's exempt. So what we're saying is we think it's more acceptable for people who are living on something like social assistance to receive cash money from family, from friends, from, you know, whatever the circumstance is, or they set this up also so it's a, you know, it's a possibility to receive through, you know, charitable giving, but for the most part it's family. So we're actually gonna privilege that over people who are living on social assistance but working, and essentially what they're doing is trying to use social assistance to do exactly what John is talking about, which is subsidize the fact that employers aren't willing to pay living wages, right? This is a system that's been set up very intentionally to crumble so that the government can look at ways of, now the language that always gets used is streamlined, right? So that they can streamline, and sure, that's going to help them to find private buyers for it. But it does another thing, which is it allows them to pretend that they're going to be able to pay for something like the basic income solely off of eliminating people like me, right? And again, it's really easy to sell the idea of eliminating people like me because people like me have been put in a situation where it's clear that to most social assistance recipients, we're the face of a really bad program. And I'm not gonna mince words. There are absolutely regular occasions where coming into an office like an ODSP office and interacting with workers is a deeply dehumanizing experience, right? And that's part of the reality. They don't want workers like me, workers like the members of my local, to be in a situation where we're thinking of the people across the table as human beings, but they also don't want the people on the other side of the table thinking of us as workers, as people who are they want us thinking of us as workers. They don't want them thinking of us as people. And so when we get into situations like the government of Ontario, there was a Toronto Star article that was done about this. The government of Ontario in 2015, more than half of all positions that were hired for in the government of Ontario were part-time or contract positions.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So when people think, you know, when people are still absolutely in the mindset of, well, you're already part of the privileged few, so how can you go about whining? And I understand where that, you know, where that sentiment comes from, but it really comes down to pitting the working class and those who are living on social assistance, so those who are living below the poverty line, pitting us against each other, because heaven forbid we actually worked together, we would be their worst nightmare.
That's right.
Right? So that's one of the realities of the system that's been created. And then we know that the next thing that the government does from there is they say, well, now that we have let this system crumble, now that we've put this bug in your ear that you know, a privatized company could do it better, we move to this sort of stealthy, we will find a way to administer a program like social assistance privately, and we will do it by in a way that, then we're not going to up and sell it all at once. So we know, for example, that the government has looked very seriously at, if you streamline, right, if you eliminate a lot of the red tape that's associated with applying to and receiving social assistance, you can then have it administered through like a call center. Like a massive call center that people can call into to get services from the Government of Ontario. Well, this already exists. Anybody know what it's called? It's called Service Ontario. Does anybody know what has been happening to Service Ontario over the last couple of years? Massive privatization. Massive privatization. So this is where the government says, this is perfect. We can line up all of our dominoes in a row, and in the meantime, we can convince people that we're doing this because we recognize how inhumane the social assistance system is. Well, who designed it, right? It's been designed to crumble. It's been designed so that there is as much conflict between the people delivering the services and the people receiving the services as humanly possible. And then in the meantime, they bring this to the forefront, and I think this is really important. They bring a suggestion like basic income to the forefront right at the time that fights around a $15 minimum wage, around fairness with things like scheduling and paid sick days. And so right as, obviously I'm wearing my heart on my sleeve right now, but right as a fight like the Fight for 15 and Fairness is starting to get a real hold, because people have recognized that precarious work is fundamentally taking over, the lives of most working people. Right as that is happening, you've got this neoliberal stalking horse, right? You've got this perfect opportunity to convince people that you're making these changes in a way that is supposed to improve a system that you purposely let rot. And so that's why people need to recognize, and I understand how beautiful the unicorn of basic income is. People need to recognize that basic income will not and is not in the province of Ontario right now being implemented in a vacuum. It's not being implemented with the true intention of improving poverty in this province. It is being implemented because the government is in the privatization game, and the government is also in the game of wanting to be as an employer as little as possible, right? And so they see this as an opportunity to take one of their big workforces, a workforce that is desperately needed, as flawed as it is, and again, I'm going to say that's been done intentionally, a workforce that is desperately needed. It allows them to eliminate that, it allows them to privatize this service, and it allows them at the same time to pretend that they're social justice heroes. And so this is the message that I think it's incredibly important. There are a lot of people working on this. John and I are both part of a Raise the Rates coalition that has been doing some really great work and has come out with a, I think, hilarious and sarcastic maximum income pilot, which suggests that we should set a maximum income. How much can any one person possibly need to live on? So let's set, let's get this government, let's get these corporations to put their money where their mouth is. If they sincerely believe that there should be a minimum income that all people can rely on, I mean, I'm all for there being a unlimited strike fund for all workers. This sounds fantastic. But where are we going to get the money from? We're going to get the money where it is, right? Which is being sat on by major corporations and being privileged through our tax system for those who are making massive, massive incomes on a yearly basis. So let's set a reasonable maximum income. Let's tax 100% beyond that, and then let's set up a true system of support for all people. If that's the route that you want to go, then you should be on as in support for the maximum basic income as you are for the minimum basic income. I think that's all I want to say for now, because I know that there are going to be a lot of great questions. But I want to say, please consider getting involved with these two fights, with the fight to raise the rates and the fight for 15 in fairness, because they are absolutely essential.
Here, here.
Great.
Thank you, sister. Thank you.